everyone. Welcome to Center Circle Podcast, your compendium that all things UPSL Georgia. You have Larry Weaver alongside Andre Bomar for this episode. Andre, we ready to rock and roll?
We are ready to go, man.
All right, so we won't mince any meats. We'll go right to the case. We're going to talk about topic number one. We are going to talk about the Georgia fall season, and then we are going to talk about the national playoffs. So we'll get right to it. First, we go over to what was the fall season. We had a different setup, Dre. When we talk about that fall season, we had 13 teams that came into the season. We had Dalton United, which we all agreed, when we talked before the beginning of the season, we said Dalton is going to probably be the winners. They until otherwise noticed, they were the ones.
Right.
Atlanta United Academy, we knew they were going to be up top. We knew the Rovers were probably going to do good. Kalanji Pro Profile, always expect something good out of them. Weren't quite sure what we were going to get out of SSL, out of FC Birmingham, North Georgia United, Los Tigres, Venotinto. Then you had UMA FC, you had Atlanta City FC. You also had, Legends FC. So we had a lot of teams that we had confidence in, and a lot of teams that we weren't quite sure we knew what we were going to get. So we go into this season, we go into week one. Dalton, impressive win over Kalanji. We had Potros with a fantastic win over North Georgia United. We had SSL with a win that we all agreed was pretty much as to expected against Atlanta City. Vino Tinto, I don't know what it is about Vino Tinto. They go to FC Birmingham and they always find a way to win.
Yeah.
And then we go into Atlanta United really thumping on UMAFC. And then we had that match against the Rovers and Legends that we got through halftime, and then just the rain opened up and that game got suspended. And that settled up week one. And then we go into week two, and then things get a little strange. Atlanta City with that win over Los Tigres, Kalanji, of course, beating Birmingham, Potros winning against Legends, Dalton thumping UMAFC. Those poor guys, they go in the first 2 weeks, Atlanta United, Dalton United, two big thumpings. Plus, to add on to it, they didn't have their full roster those first few weeks. They had a lot of kids from the academy.
Yeah. I mean, that was the thing about UMA is that, the difference between a spring season where they had a lot of the college players that were available to the fall season where it's basically a U19 team. So although they had done so well in getting to the premier, they were without the main players that got them there. And so it's compounded by the fact you start with Atlanta United and Dalton United, the two favorites for the division. It was always going to be an uphill battle. So,
Yeah. And
it was a tough start for Coach Joe and the boys
yeah.
there, but they did survive.
Yeah, Atlanta Rovers with an impressive win over Vino Tinto. SSL with a win over North Georgia. So North Georgia goes 2 weeks in and they have no win. Atlanta City with a win over Legends. Kalanji, that was a fantastic derby that we had, that 5-3 victory. Potros beating UMA again, 3 losses in a row for UMA. Potros with really impressive wins out of the gate. The Rovers beating Atlanta United. That was a surprise in week three. And Dalton United beating Birmingham again. Birmingham with 3 losses as well. So really interesting shaping up. That Rovers win over Atlanta United, that's something that will come into being later on as the season goes.
Yeah, I thought that I think this is the week you started to see a little bit of the surprising results and seeing who were going to be the trouble teams and who were going to be the teams that go forward. I think the upset there with Atlanta United was for them a blip. But I think we said in the preseason podcast that's last season that we were unsure about Atlanta United,
Yeah.
because so many of the players had gone on, been promoted up or signed pro contracts, and you have a new coach, you got new players, And so we were wondering, how will they settle in? How will they do? And honestly, I thought teams like FC Birmingham, North Georgia, who were coming off a playoff season, I thought that maybe they would take that next step up. And I saw a lot of the preparation for Atlanta City in the offseason. I thought, well, okay, they might challenge for a playoffs place. Little did I know what they would do after that.
Yeah,
That was one of the
definitely.
surprises for the season.
Yeah,
But as always, Kalanji and Dalton are always going to be favorites there. But yeah,
yeah,
there was some surprising things going
yeah.
on in week three.
And we talk about week 4. Here's another surprise right off the bat. Atlanta United Birmingham with a 2-2 draw. Atlanta City North Georgia with a draw. Rovers UMA with a draw. Legends with a big win over Los Tigres. And SSL with an impressive win over Vino Tinto. And again, week 3 and week 4, I think really dictated what was happening with Atlanta United in this season where we talked about where we weren't quite sure what we were getting with so many of the players moving on. Same thing with North Georgia, really starting to wonder what's going on because they had some staffing changes up there in North Georgia. Wasn't really seeing the same result. The other big thing, their main striker being traded off to Kalanji Pro
Kalanji,
Profile
yeah.
and you weren't they really had a loss of identity up there at the beginning of the season for North Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, we had a interview with the owner and head coach there, Jonathan Torres, and he talked about that. He talked about the drop off for that season, and he mentioned, you know, the squad was decimated, and there were games where they had to have a center back who was normally a striker.
Yeah.
They had to slot in where they could, and like you say, the coaching changes that were going on there all contributed to them. They started out near the bottom of the division in the division table, and so there was a real danger of them slipping into that relegation battle. But they managed to get themselves together and survive. But as far as Atlanta United, again, we saw what we at the time looked at it was a surprising result there, 2-2 with FC Birmingham. But Coach Davey, it was trying to reestablish a team that had never played together, and they're always going to be very young there because once they get to that next level, they move on. But it can take some time to adjust. But I tell you what, at Atlanta United, much like many of the MLS academies, you're already going to have the cream of the crop there, even though they're new to the team. They're going to be highly skilled, and this is a professional training workout that they go through. They train every day, and so they're on a pro track. And so little by little, you saw a very rapid increase in their quality and the results that were coming from it. So yeah, it started to take pretty good shape there in week 4, and you saw some of the teams that were going to be troubled. And some of the surprises, SSL, I think, was a big surprise as they started to bubble up the table at that time. Because honestly, at the beginning of the season, although they're a KSA academy, you start to think they're second best in the KSA academy,
Yeah.
in the
Well, and
system
and
there.
we saw that with the Kalanji Derby,
Yes,
where that game started out with goals from SSL, and then Kalanji took over. But you've also
right.
got to because you've got Kalanji with Patrick Okonkwo, Anthony Sumo, sprinkled in there from time to time, Sandoval. So
Yeah,
you
Junior.
and you never that Coach and again in this fall season, Coach Bruno had other obligations. So some of the assistant coaching was handling the coaching on week to week for the UPSL. So you started to see some splintering of philosophy in a way
Yes.
where they still were doing what Kalanji does, but you saw in a way you saw that the emperor could bleed.
I gotta tell
And
you, Larry, that the Kalanji in general has always been a frustrating team to follow. I think, I think it's because of that lack of focus
yes.
that you see from the top, from the coaching staff, from the ownership. Um, always, I've said this last season, I say it every season about Kalanji. If they focused on a single league that they're playing in, they would be unbeatable.
Yeah.
You know, if they
They
put
have
all
so
their
many
resources together.
they have so
Unfortunately,
much talent.
yeah, exactly, and tons of talent, and but I don't think we're ever going to see that from them because they're the type of club that plays multiple leagues. They spread out their coaching, they spread out their players. Many of them played it with Apotheos FC last season in the NPSL, and so you don't have that focus there, and that, hurts their chances. I mean, we see that they really struggle to stay with the likes of Dalton United and Atlanta United Academy during the season. And I think that's going to happen again this season because they
Yeah.
seem to be starting the same way. I mean, they're always going to be great. Like you say, they have the talent. They're always going to be in the playoffs, I think. And but I think they're going to be missing that extra gear that they need because they're diluted. They're not focused all the
Yeah.
way. And so that's my opinion of it
Yeah.
going in.
So we move on to week 5, and then here's where things get interesting. Potros with another win. SSL with a win over Legends. Los Tigres finally get a win over North Georgia. Kalanji beating Rovers, which is big. That nil-nil draw with Birmingham and UMA. And then there's a massive win, Atlanta United, Dalton United, because we went into that spring final in the playoffs has got to be one of the greatest UPSL matches you will ever see between two clubs, Atlanta United, Dalton United, going to extra time, Dalton winning it late in extra time. That was one of those that, you could say I was there when that match happened.
Yeah, I mean that game, I even like to go back and watch the highlights now. I mean, from beginning to end, it was drama ridden because there was so much at stake too. Very well played game by both sides, and what an ending,
Yeah.
in extra time. And so, you know, in this match too, again went to the wire there. Controversial, I would say, goal at the end that
Yeah.
gave Atlanta United the victory. Um, and it really lit a fire for the title race. It was becoming a two-horse race
Yeah.
at this early time, and so that was interesting to see.
Yeah, we look at the table. This is from week 5. SSL at the top of the table. That was a little surprising, but the massive surprise was Potros FC in second place. We didn't expect to see them so high so quickly because they had taken the previous season off, and you could see what they put together in that time away. They got themselves in a just perfect space and really put on an impressive result through those first 5 weeks of the fall season.
Yeah, I mean that was the one of the more interesting stories from the season in Portoros, what they did in the season in general, because they went about their business real quietly.
Yeah.
And I think Christopher Aranga has put together a fantastic and solid club there to where they are going to be always consistently challenging. They don't have the glamour of like a Dalton United, a Kalanji, or Atlanta United Academy, but I often equate them to like, hey, this is the blue collar team.
Yeah.
This is the team that gets out there. They just play football. They follow the rules.
Yeah.
There's a reason why their manager has won manager of the season, I believe, 4 times now
Yes.
in the
Something
past
like
5
that.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
he's
think the only
yeah.
time he didn't win is when they skipped a season.
Yeah, when yeah.
You know,
Eh,
and this is the result that
yeah.
that you see here. So it's amazing to see
Yeah.
that, and I think you're going to see the same type of uh, results now this
Yeah.
season. So
Yeah. And you look at the way that the season wrapped up, or here in week 5, you have 7 teams that make it to the playoffs, and you look at those 7 teams, and those are all killers in those top 7. And you look at down at the relegation, 2 go down to Division 1, and you've got UMA and North Georgia. UMA, they had just been promoted to division or from Division 1, so weren't quite sure what we were going to get. North Georgia, we were kind of shocked at this point.
yeah,
We were
that
like,
that was
this wasn't where we expected them to be.
Yeah, that was probably one of the more shocking things, and after having an interview with Coach Torres, it kind of explained why they were down there. But that was a shocker in the sense that at that time you're thinking, God, they probably going to go down.
Yeah.
Is the thought I had. UMA, I think it was kind of, well, this is a youth team, and
Yeah.
they're playing with the big boys, so this is going to be a struggle for them. But
Well,
I
and
tell
they
you
and
what,
yeah, they even said that going into the season. They knew.
right? Yep.
They're like, "Hey, we know we're not gonna have these players in. Should we take the season off? Or should
Yeah,
we
that was
or
a
should we
discussion.
play?" And we had those discussions with them, and we gave them we gave them our suggestions just as, the broadcasting company. And, full disclosure, you being the Georgia conference manager, you have these discussions with them and say, here's the pros, here's the cons, you make the decision.
Well,
They went ahead and decided to play.
yeah, and there's a special type of pressure that comes with playing with UMA, in that they're based i- with their community. They're very tight with their community. It's very much a Korean influenced type of club as well, and in the coaching staff and many of the players that play there, many of the businesses that support this club. And so the results were a concern, because they expect excellence. They got
Yeah.
it in the way that they won Division 1. They just ran
Yeah,
through that
they
division.
scored 63 goals in that first season in the
Yes,
and now granted, a couple of those wins were significant wins. When they played Volpe, I think they won something
was
like
it
11 to
13 or something?
1 or
Yeah,
13 to 1.
something
It was
ridiculously.
ridiculous.
Yeah,
But there again, we go back and we remember that Kalanji game where they won 22 to 1. So, I
yeah,
mean, it can happen. Kalanji has the
yeah,
record.
yeah. They
Yeah,
got that, and I think that the added pressure that UMA was under probably fed them into being more serious and more focused in getting out of that relegation zone. And they did a great job towards the end of the season, as we'll see
yeah.
later.
Yeah, we'll jump into week 6. You can see 2-2 tie, Los Tigres and Kalaji. That was interesting. Dalton, impressive win over Rovers. We're starting to see a pattern with the Rovers where they're starting to lose bigger games. SSL just eking out that win over UMA. That one should have ended in a draw. Bad luck
Yeah,
for them late in that match.
late.
Atlanta
Yeah,
City with a great win over Vino Tinto, and Atlanta United with an impressive win over Potros. But this is where we started to see a little bit of a change in UMA where they were starting to get some good quality goals, and they were starting to get confidence.
yeah. And it's also where I think you started to see the slip in KSA and Kalanji,
Yeah.
because that lack of focus when you have a team like the Strongest, who were struggling last season, and as we know, they were relegated at the end of the season. But
Ah, you're
they
spoiling
they
it.
played poorly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
We're,
I was previewing the rest of
yeah. We jump into week 7. Kalanji with a win over Atlanta City. Good win. North
Yeah,
Georgia, impressive win over Legends. Here's the first
surprising.
win for UMAFC over Los Tigres. Dalton, another good win over Potros. North Georgia finally getting on the right track with that win over Vinotinto, and Atlanta United continuing to roll, this time over SSL. Starting to see a pattern with Atlanta United. They're starting to stretch away, and Dalton, so it starts to get in that two race again. Dalton and Atlanta United, they're starting to eke out these wins and slowly move ahead of everybody.
Yeah, I mean there you see the roller coaster of Kalanji. The week before, poor result. This week, good result. And it was up and down for them. That's why they weren't in the mix in the top two
Yeah,
there. But North Georgia, man, what a vital win for them.
yeah,
And what they did with the goal difference as well, which is what they needed.
yeah,
And so UMA getting that first win was special. But again, I think we see the result of Vino Tinto and Los Tigres started to become the favorites for the drop.
yeah.
And so it started to take shape week 7.
Yeah, you look at week 8, another impressive win for UMA over Atlanta City. Birmingham finally get a win. That game between Los Tigres and Atlanta United gets postponed. Vino Tinto gets on the right track with a win over Legends. Dalton with another impressive win over SSL. SSL now starting to slip down a few notches with a couple losses. Dalton still putting the pressure on Atlanta United to win by again beating SSL.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Dalton started to solidify their challenge for the top. SSL, I think, was just it was at the time of the season where people are starting to take them seriously. It's not just a promoted club anymore. This is a club
Yeah,
that's challenging, and so you prepare a little bit differently for them in doing those types of things. Great win from UMA against Atlanta City because Atlanta City were really coming along. Coach Joao has that club, hitting on all cylinders,
yeah,
and so it was a good result for them, especially as they fight to stay out of the relegation battle there.
yeah. Then we go into week 9, or we look at the table as of week 8. You already see the major changes. Club the strongest and Legends, they're now in the relegation zone.
Yeah, look where North
UMA
Georgia
jumping
went to.
all the way up. North Georgia and UMA jumping up into those 8 and 9 spots.
Yeah, it's
And then
amazing what one weekend can do when you have a result like that.
you have Potros who were at in the second spot. They've now dropped all the way down to fifth spot. And here's Atlanta City. They're dropping down a little bit. SSL dropped down a little bit because at one moment SSL were at the top of the table. Now here's Dalton United.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how tight the points are from seventh place, which is one place out of the playoff spots with UMA. It's only 4 points out of the relegation zone too.
Yeah,
So you're fighting for a playoff spot, but you're also trying to make sure you don't get into that quagmire that is the relegation zone. And so every week, every point counts, whether it's a draw or a win, goal difference, all those things you have to think about
yeah.
to keep yourself competing.
Well, we always talk about in the UPSL Southeast region, the Georgia Conference is one of the most competitive conferences where you have at any given moment the any of these teams could be at the top.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like you say, top to bottom, it's just there's never a really off weekend for anybody. Every club is here for a reason,
Yeah.
you
We
know.
had
And
that we had that little run there in 2020, late 2021, 2022, where Kalanji was the powerhouse and they were the ones that were moving on through the playoffs and going to the national playoffs. And then they took a season off, and since then they've been second fiddle to some of these teams. You've
well,
seen
yeah, Larry, I think, and I've thought a lot about that, and I think for so long, even before when this was the Atlanta Caribbean League and transferring into the UPSL, I think teams like Kalanji were head and shoulders above most of the competition. They were a big fish in a small pond. I think one of the things that's happened is that you've had teams like Atlanta United Academy come in, Dalton United, the improvement of Potros, and these teams that have come in to compete. And it's not that Kalanji has gotten worse. I think they've stagnated, but the competition has stepped it up.
Well, I
And
think one of the things, and we've kind of talked about it, and we'll allude to it probably in future episodes when we get into the spring season, where Kalanji is starting to age. We've got a
yes,
lot of the same players that have been here for not only seasons but years. And you have these teams like Atlanta United, like we talked about at the beginning of this season. We didn't know what we are going to get because they had so much turnover. You have a UMA; they were using a lot of kids. Same thing with North Georgia with FC Birmingham. They have a lot of turnover, whereas with Kalanji, it's the same 18, 19 guys.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they're starting, these teams are going in and they're knowing what Kalanji's strengths and weaknesses are. And you kind of saw that in that we go all the way back several weeks back in that Kalanji Derby, where you've got the SSL guys that have seen those Kalanji players for years and years because they were always the head of the table when they were coming up through the academy, and now they were having a chance to go at them, and just kind of got overwhelmed in that second half of that game. But that we go back to that far. So let's go back now into week 9. Great win by Dalton over Los Tigres. Another draw across the board for just about every other game. Another postpone for the Legends. They just had bad luck in the fall season with the weather. And
Yeah.
another impressive win by Atlanta United over Atlanta City. So we start to see a little bit of a dip for the Rovers, where the Rovers are, when in the spring season, they came out head and shoulders above everybody else, and they started to run away, and then they dropped off in that late part of the spring season. Then coming into the fall season, there was a change in coaching, and you see a little bit of the change in the philosophy. And they also brought in a guy that we talk about many, many times, Akini James.
Yes,
He
sir.
comes in, but he's not playing every game. He comes in, he's sprinkled in from time to time.
And
So
he
you're
really
not
wasn't
seeing
fit.
consistency with the Rovers that we were so used
Right.
to seeing.
Right, right. I think that, yeah, the problem with Rovers in the spring was in the locker room.
Yeah.
They had a split locker room. They had problems with coaching. That was remedied in the summer, in the off season, and Coach Ayu got that club really hitting on all cylinders for the fall season. It seemed to be they fixed the problem in the locker room, and they were able to start to repair, so to speak, the club. Now it wasn't a situation where they could go night and day and look to win the division, but they did end up there and near the top at I don't get too far ahead, but uh, they did start to compete in much better fashion than they did in the spring. So that
Yeah.
was something to see. And I think with Dalton, I think that last season, I think you saw the peak
Yeah.
with Dalton. I think that they could fall into something similar to which what you explained with Kalanji, is that you have a lot of players there that have been there for a while. They're getting a little long in the tooth, and without an academy, see, that's the thing that we we'll talk about in future podcasts. The Georgia Conference is developing an academy and encouraging these teams, especially these historic teams like Dalton United, to make sure that they develop that academy so they have talent that are coming through the ranks. But without that, you have to acquire talent. And so that takes a while to develop chemistry and things of that nature. But last season, I think you saw them at their peak, but I think they're going to have that similar struggle going into the spring season here in 2024. We'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see.
Moving on to week number 10. Dalton, impressive win over North Georgia. Another draw by SSL. Vino Tinto and UMA, that was a great draw. Draw by Birmingham, and a massive win for Atlanta United over Legends. Legends extremely struggling as we
Yeah,
enter the second half of the season. And they, Coach Wozniak, at this point, he needs every point that he can to make sure that he doesn't fall into that relegation zone.
yeah. I mean, we had an interview on the Set Pieces podcast with Coach Wozniak, and he was talking about the season and what a struggle it was because of personnel. And it is a situation where he came in as coach, but he had to build from nothing. And
Yeah,
so, at this point, they're decimated at this point in the season. Whereas Atlanta United are hitting stride. I mean,
yeah,
Legends didn't have the horses to
yeah.
keep up with
Well,
United in
and
that
and
game.
and one of the things that Coach Wozniak really had a real problem with was the defense in that fall season for Legends. They were just wide open in that back line, and just especially on the edges. They allowed so many balls through on the edges and just allowed teams like Atlanta United to just chop them down.
Yeah, I think that's the contrast you saw. Atlanta United, like I said earlier in the pod, is that this is a professionally trained team. They train every day. Legends is a part-time team,
Yeah.
and they have all new players They don't know each other that well because they haven't been together that long, so they don't have the chemistry of knowing where how to play with each other, much less against a team like Atlanta United. And this is the result. This is the result you get out of it.
Yeah.
But we'll see later on that Legends still has some heart, and we we see how they'll recover later on.
Yeah. And then here's an impressive draw: Dalton and Atlanta United. Legends losing to UMA. UMA needed those points. Great win for Atlanta United. A draw again for Birmingham. Atlanta Rovers finally getting a win over SSL, and Kalanji with a great win over Vinotinto. So week 11, you're starting to see Atlanta United really putting the pressure on Dalton at the top of the table. UMA finally finding their stride. Legends still struggling.
Yeah.
Birmingham and Los Tigres and Vinotinto definitely down at the bottom, really struggling.
Yeah, this is the interesting part of the season where you have very defined races for the three different races. One is for the division title, the other is for playoff places, and the
Yeah,
other is surviving from
yeah,
relegation.
yeah. Because
And yeah, go
here
ahead.
we go. Yeah, here we go into
Yeah,
the table at in week 11. Atlanta United right there with Dalton. Potros
yeah,
going down a little bit. Atlanta Rovers, now they're back in the mix. Kalanji's back in the mix. And you start, you see now UMA, they found their way into the playoffs in a week 11, whereas they were at the bottom of the table in the first 3, 4 weeks. Now
yeah.
here, somehow they found their way into the playoffs. Los Tigres and Legends really odd men out right now. But look at that. You were just talking before. Look at the point variance between the teams. There's not that very many points, and you anything can change. And we saw it in this fall season where every single week teams were flipping and flopping from position to position.
Yeah, we had some of those postponed games and rescheduled games. The other dynamic in this league table is you look at that second column beside the points is matches played. Look
Yeah,
at Kalanji on 16. They've only played 7 games,
yeah.
you know,
And it seems like,
whereas
yeah, and it's one of those
SSL
things
has
where
played 11.
yeah, somehow Kalanji always end up with an extra game or two in hand as they get later in the season, and then they pounce with those points and they shoot up into the table. And
Yeah,
one minute you're not thinking about them, and the next minute you're worried about them winning the whole thing. As it
yeah. I
if
mean,
you're a team in there like a Dalton and Atlanta United.
right, exactly. I mean, that can play in your favor, but it also can backfire because you do still have to play the games.
Yeah.
And like I said before earlier in the pod, that these aren't the same teams that we had in Atlanta Caribbean League when,
Yeah.
when we first started the UPSL. These are high power teams, and when you got that many games, it becomes fixture congestion too. And
Yes.
remember, Kalanji are playing other leagues, so you have
Yeah.
players that are playing 2 games on the weekend. They're playing in this league, they're playing in another league. And so, you can dig a hole for yourself if you don't keep up with these other games. And
Yeah.
I don't think it serves teams now to try to, skip games and everything and then make a run at the end because there's too much quality to run through. And there are
Yeah.
going to be teams that are hitting their stride, man.
Yeah.
But UMA, I think at this point, the most surprising team that I witnessed there in a good way because you're basically looking at a U19 team or an academy team that are pushing for a playoff place. When early in the season, it's like, oh, surely they're going to go down. That
Yeah,
that was the thought
exactly.
I had.
Yeah.
But that was an impressive performance, and it really shows the type of coaching that they have is really legit there.
Yeah. Then we move into week number 12. Win by Rovers, another draw by UMA, this time over Kalanji, which was interesting. North Georgia with the win over Birmingham. And then here you see some makeup games going
Yeah,
on where you had
fixture congestion.
Potros beating Kalanji, then beating Los Tigres, losing to Atlanta United, another impressive win by Atlanta United over Vinotinto. Starting to see these massive point spreads by Atlanta United, which is really working in their favor. starting to think, okay, is this the another season victory for Atlanta United?
Yeah, I mean, the scores tell the story right there. Vital win for North Georgia, who are trying to keep themselves out of that relegation race. But Atlanta United starting to stretch it up there to have that two horse race with Dalton United. But again, Kalanji, again, roller coaster,
Yeah,
up, down, and like I say, they have a lot of games to make up. And Portros, just a solid team that's going to be right around there, you know.
yeah.
So it's interesting to see. But yeah, you see the strugglings with like Vino Tinto and Los Tigres, and it's starting to show what's going to happen now as we get down to the nitty gritty here.
Go into week 13, Legends with a massive win over Kalanji, and
How
that was a
about that one?
Kalanji team that just didn't, they showed up with very little squad, and Legends were able to capitalize on it. A great win by FC Birmingham over Legends again. Rovers with another win. City with a win. A draw for Atlanta United. Kalanji. Rovers with a good win. Dalton pulling off. I was thinking that that match was going to end in a nil-nil draw
Yeah,
against Legends, and they were able to score that goal. SSL with an impressive win over Los Tigres. So we really started to see this, like you were just talking about, where you get a lot of games that need to be made up, and it's starting to get congested, where you're having to play multiple games in a week, and you're starting to see the quality of the matches not be what you would expect.
yeah. I mean, look what happened with Kalanji. 1 point from a possible six, with so many games to make up. That's devastating for them
Yeah.
in the title race. But often a lot is said about Legends in the in the fight against relegation. They were rock bottom before this week. But this game here, we often talk about the last game that we'll get to later on, where it was considered a survival game. But this game made all the difference because this was surely going to be a loss for them, I thought,
Yes. Yeah,
against Kalani.
we all expected it because of what we had seen so far in the season. We're like, they're not gonna be able to pull this off. And then
Yeah,
Kalanji
Coach
didn't.
Wozniak got it cranked there. I
Yeah,
mean, that
and
shows.
Kalanji did send a little thin squad
Hmm.
because
But
they
that's when you
expected.
take advantage.
But that's when you take it exactly. That's when you take
Yeah.
advantage. So
If
we
if a club's not gonna take it seriously, then you just come in and you take advantage of them not taking it seriously and take them out like they did.
Yeah,
And
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 then
what do you think that does to the confidence of these young players
well,
that win the game
exactly,
like that?
exactly. Because well, you kind of have a double edged sword there because you as a young kid you're like they don't even respect me because they're not even sending their best.
Yeah, they probably didn't even do any scouting or anything.
Yeah,
Oh, we're
and
just gonna roll over this relegated
we got
type
these
team.
guys, they're nobody.
Yeah.
So you go into it with a bit of a chip on your shoulder and you're like, okay, I'll show you guys.
Yeah, but boy. And then, Birmingham on another day did get the best of Legends, but I think that this, their confidence is on the up, not on the down. Kalonji, I think that this week kind of ruled them out of the title race for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
And but yeah, I think it became now who can get into the playoffs. Atlanta City with a vital win over Portos,
yeah.
um, and
Yeah,
then
because
of
they're holding
course,
on for dear life at this point
yeah,
to try to make it to the playoffs. You see that win of Dalton and Vino Tinto. We go into week
yep,
14. Kalanji, great win over North Georgia. Here's this was the makeup of week 1 for Legends FC. They went into this match. They only had to play 45 minutes. The match was at 1-1
one, yeah,
with 45 minutes, and they came out and they gave everything for those 45 minutes, scored 3 goals, beat the Rovers 4-2. Los Tigres and Vinotinto 4-2. These are two teams that are at the bottom of the table fighting to stay alive. And then we go into week 13. Dalton's at the top of the table. Atlanta United firmly behind them. Atlanta Rovers are starting to dip a little bit. Kalanji, they're on their way up. Here's Atlanta City. Now they've jumped over UMA. Now they're going to the playoffs. and UMA are out by 1 point, then you have Los Tigres and Vinotinto. They get relegated. Legends FC, with that win over the Rovers, get those two vital points and they find themselves in the last regular position. They survive. North Georgia, they also survived after, and UMA and them, both of them, dreadful start, but they survived. UMA just missing the playoffs by 1 point.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, with the a special shout out for Legends FC, because when you look back at that Atlanta United game and where you lose a game like that 11-0 and you are in the relegation zone, it's very easy to throw your hands up and give up. We
Yeah.
saw it the previous season with Laminio, who didn't even bother to come back into the league because
Yeah.
they were humiliated in a relegation battle that season. And so, with that happening at the time that it did, I think a lot of credit goes to Coach Wozniak and the entire club there at Legends to survive. You know, yeah, I think
And
the
and
the
it was
new
only their second season.
yeah, exactly, exactly, in the premiere, and so, it's one of those things that you look and you say, "What kind of foundations does that set for that area?" Because now, you know, they can use that as a way to attract players down into the LaGrange
Yeah,
area and say, "Hey, we've got a solid club here. We're gonna be competing. We're playing in the league with Atlanta United, Dalton United, now Georgia Athletic." And so I think that could be like a turning point. Though these last 2 games that they had, I think could be a turning point for the club's fortunes going forward. So that
yeah,
was an amazing thing. But Dalton United pipping Atlanta United there at the end of the season is also another amazing story that
yeah,
was, had all the drama of the previous season when they played in the playoffs.
yeah.
Those two are becoming quite the rivals to each other.
So we go into, and think about the fact that with Coach Wozniak and Legends FC, UMAFC are also in LaGrange with them. So
Yeah.
you've got two top level clubs fighting for players in the same area.
Yeah.
And
Spoiler alert, they don't like each other.
yeah, yeah. But
So
it
that's
it
that's
it
a
builds
that's
a
a very
great
interesting
derby, and,
derby down there.
you look at the same thing with Dalton and North Georgia,
Fortunately,
they're
yeah, yeah.
playing in the same area. They're not technically in the same area, they kinda practice out of 2 different cities, but they both play in Dalton in different stadiums. You
Right. Yeah,
see
North
that
Georgia is
rivalry up there, though.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, North Georgia, they're out of Calhoun, which
Yeah,
is 10 miles south of Dalton. But like you said, they play their home games in Dalton at Riverbend Stadium there. So they're very close up there. It's a proper derby
yes.
between those two teams.
And those teams can pull not only from the North Georgia, but they're also being able to pull from Tennessee.
Oh yeah, all from all around, and that's what Coach Torres has said that they're attracting players from all over the region up there in North Georgia and Tennessee and even the Carolinas in some instances. So, yeah, I think that that's a football rich area, and which is why I'm interested to see how Dalton is going to transition and replace some of the aging talent they have up there because there's plenty of talent to pull from. But
Yeah.
will North Georgia outdo them? So we'll have to
Yeah.
see over time.
So we go into the playoffs. We know that Atlanta United is going to have to play Atlanta City. We know that Potros is going to play the Rovers, and we know Kalanji and SSL are going to play each other. So we know that going into it. We kind of discuss it, like we said at the beginning of the season, it was Dalton's to lose, and they
Hmm.
came out on top. So we knew they were going to have a bye and we knew what we were going to get, but we did not expect what was going to happen in the playoffs because Atlanta City, the last seed, coming out of nowhere and beating Kalanji and at Shiloh Stadium, which was impressive. We were like, what is going on here? You can see some of the goals from that match. Again, Anthony Sumo just being a beast on the edge.
Hmm.
Beautiful ball into the middle. ends up being a penalty. They convert it. Patrick Okonkwo, he's always going to score the goal. We move into halftime 1-1. Then another beautiful goal, this time from Flowers for
Hmm.
Atlanta City, and really starting to strive. Number 9, Thierry Jules, really took over the playoffs
Yeah,
for
Star was
the
born.
the Georgia Conference, and you see here he converts this penalty to bring it up 2-2, easily scored. We go in farther in, and it ends. If we go back, where is it? It
Yeah, I
ends
think
up at the end. It ended up 3-1
one. Yeah,
for them. They go on to the finals to take on Dalton United at Dalton. Here is number 7 taking on number 1. They have already beaten Atlanta United. They've beaten Kalanji. How on earth could they get past Dalton? And then the
I
next thing you
yeah.
know, 37 minutes in, goal. We go into halftime. It's 1-0 Atlanta City. And at this point, we're a little surprised, but this is Dalton. They can turn it on a dime when they want right here, right out of the gate after halftime. It's now 1-1.
You know what I was thinking, Larry, during this game was that I remembered the previous season with Atlanta United in that I was impressed with, here's another one,
Yeah, beautiful
goal
slotted
from Atlanta
goal.
City. And despite that, I was thinking Dalton's at home. They don't really buckle under pressure, so to
Yeah,
speak. We saw it the previous season.
and
So I thought there's always going to be that extra that Dalton's going to be able to overcome and get through to the next round. That's what I was thinking.
and a
But
penalty there. It's
after the
now
penalty is when you started thinking, wait a minute now.
yes, because it was 2-1, and then here's a penalty late in the match. Now it's 3-1, and then just taking it on himself, slots it over. Thierry puts it in the back. It's
That's the
four to
shocker.
one.
That's the backbreaker there.
Yeah, that one was, he gets his hat trick. It's and Dalton, and this is, I think this might be, a caveat to watch because this wasn't what we expected from Dalton. For them to drop like they did, and you're like, okay, 4-1, but we're not done yet. Dalton come
Right.
back, they
They
score
scored two.
in the 97th minute. Then they come back 2 minutes later, another
and,
penalty.
and
This
you
was
do think,
three.
yeah, I mean, you do think that they got
And
a
a
shot
great
here.
save. The keeper for Atlanta City was on his head for the majority of this match. It's now 4-3, and that's how it ends. But
Yeah, they
Dalton
ran out of
tried to put
time.
it on him at the end and just didn't pull it off. They almost pulled out a massive come from behind to take it to
Yeah,
overtime. We weren't sure. We wasn't sure what we were going to get, but
that would have
Atlanta City
outdone
was
the
able to hang on.
yeah, that would have outdone the Atlanta United final from last season if they were
Yeah.
able to do that. They came a hair close to it, just ran out of time.
Yeah, and we saw Dalton United again, 2 seasons in a row through 23 where they were in the finals. They made it in the spring. We covered that first match where they fell, and I think that they really got, in my opinion, they got, because I was there, I really felt like they got taken advantage of by Tennessee Tiempo, where
Yeah.
the storm came in. Instead of waiting for the storm to end, they elected to move the game over into the indoor facility, and they never had a chance to get back in that match. And Tempo were able to pull out the victory.
Well, yeah, that was the time. That was the turning point, and
Eh,
I don't like the way that went down. I think they had a little pressure to
yes,
continue that game indoors, and it worked against them.
yeah. And when we talk about the national playoffs that this moves on into, we look at some of the matches that were in there. Atlanta City just unbelievably, making it into the playoffs. They ended up having to travel all the way to St. Louis City to play in that first round because
Yeah.
St. Louis City taking, oh, it was their first, if I remember right, it was their first season in the UPSL. They're in the Kentucky Tennessee region for the fall. They beat Tempo. They move on into the playoffs, and really impressive. And now there's a gateway conference that they're a part of in that St. Louis, uh,
Yeah.
East
Midwest.
Illinois or
Yeah.
West Illinois area. So interesting there, a whole conference built, but they had a impressive run making it. We were able to cover that last match before going into the Final Four between them and Florida Premier, and a lot of changes down in the Florida Conference. What One of the things I noticed going into the national playoffs as we watched it go through, we didn't see any teams from the previous year make it. We
Yeah.
saw a lot of new faces in those brackets, and then we saw an interesting dichotomy in the Final Four where you had two MLS academies and two teams that kind of, in that Kalanji style that are made up, they're a mishmash of guys that may not practice all the time, but they show up and they play.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting that we have a lot of MLS academies now in the UPSL, but especially in the playoffs scenarios, they struggle. They
Yeah,
struggle to get. They haven't won the top prize yet, and I think
yeah,
that shows the quality of competition across the nation
yeah,
in this league, and it can't be taken lightly. I mean, you look at Atlanta City from our conference, had a very poor showing. But again, when you get to the Nationals, like you mentioned, that was quite a bit of travel for them. Very young team for Atlanta City, maybe overawed playing against a high caliber team like St. Louis Academy, and it can be overwhelming. And I think
yeah,
that happens throughout the entire nation. You have teams that have won their domestic sort of division, they go on to
yeah.
the national, it's a whole nother world,
Well, because you
a
got to
whole
think
nother
about, yeah,
competition.
you got to think about the fact that as you go through that national bracket, if you move on deep into the bracket, you make it to the quarterfinals or even the national finals, you could find yourself traveling from one side of the country to the other. And you're moving not only your staff, you're moving 20 plus players and having to have accommodations for a couple days. You're looking at anywhere from 20 to $30,000 if you're getting buses and you're getting hotel rooms, all the food. So you really have to prepare, and that's where the academies, especially the MLS academies, have a little bit more of a financial, I would say, a
Yeah,
gain.
financial
They
support for
they have
sure.
financial support. You see a St. Louis City, a team that just came into the MLS, they're really just formed. They make it their first season in the UPSL. They make it all the way to the finals. Now, unfortunately, they fell to Chiriaco FC out of California. They didn't have very far to travel. I think that if I remember right, they traveled like less than 2 hours or something
Yeah,
like that. They
it
they
was in their
played
backyard, basically.
nearby
Yeah.
uh, in in Coachella. So Coachella to Irvine was not a far drive for them.
Yeah, these things make a difference, but this is what separates a league like the UPSL from this is not a rec league. And so, it's been stressed to these teams that, I'm a conference manager here in Georgia, and we stress to them, you have to run your club as a professional club.
Yeah,
And so that includes business investment, that includes connection with your local community, because you can be successful. I mean, look what happened with Atlanta City. Very successful, ran through the playoffs, beating the best of the best in Georgia. First round, get destroyed because it's a different level, it's a different step up. And so you have not just the competition, not just the competition you're playing against, which was top notch in their case, but there's the travel, like you said, all the things that take a lot of resources from your team, and that includes for the players, for the staff, for any traveling fans. And yeah, I think it can be overwhelming, especially to a team that's not used to it.
Yeah.
And so teams like Kalanji, Dalton, Atlanta United, Georgia Revolution, they are they are more used to this type of competition, used to the type of competition that requires travel expenses to be taken care of and things like that. But a team like Atlanta City, maybe not so much. Teams like Portoros that are coming up, they're starting to develop that foundation, and they did it the right way. They started with basically nothing and built it from the ground up, and now they have a solid base. They have solid sponsorship support and business support from the local community and things of that nature. And this is a reality of life that these teams need to understand. Otherwise, you're not going to last long. And I'll just say that in Georgia, when we first started back in 2018 here in the UPSL and joined it, none of those teams are here
Yeah.
now in 2024. None of those teams survived.
Yeah,
Um,
we've seen so many teams come and go in just the 3 years that we have as ASMG,
right, right.
where,
So
you know, just and we've seen some players make it to the next level, you know, players like Kareem Tamimi
yeah, oh yeah,
and some others that have come out of Kalanji's system, some that have come out of some of the other teams that are in the nearby area. So we've seen players make it to the next level, and then we've seen those that had so much talent just drop off into the ether.
yeah, yeah, and that's why I said earlier in the pod that these teams have to develop, a professional type of operation, which includes an academy that allow team like players like Kareem Tamimi to get to that next level. But you start with them very young, and you coach them up, and they come through to the first team, and that's how you keep that consistency going. If you're just a team that puts together and acquires talent, you'll be good one year and you'll be terrible another year. It's going
Yeah,
to be up and down. Then you're not going to last because you can't go through the whole competitive structure that the UPSL have, because you're just going to run out of energy really.
yeah. Well, that's going to wrap up what was fall 2023. Next episode, we're going to start talking about spring. It's already here. Week one, who's in, who's out, all those good things. You'll find out more. So, next time on the Center Circle podcast. So, for Andre Bomar, I've been Larry Weaver. Thank you, been watching. We'll see you next time.